for bringing us to this time. We thank you for allowing me to stand and sit behind this sacred desk. Father, I thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for the privilege. And now, God, we turn to hear a word from thee. I have studied, but I need your strength. I have prepared, but I need your power. I'm willing and I want to, but only you can make me able. Silently now I wait for thee. Ready, thy Lord, thy will to see. Open my eyes and illumine me. Spirit divine. I'm on my way, but there is a detour. Our text for today comes from James, the fourth chapter, the 13th through the 15th verse, which reads as follows. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. I'm on my way, but there is a detour. You know, this week, as Bishop and Lady Johnson had said, this week was a very, very trying and testing week this week. And the reality of it is, I think quite a few of us went through it this week. And none of us intended for this week to be the way in which it turned out. But thanks be unto God, he still deserves the glory and he still deserves the honor. I've realized in my time of preparing that many times, many situations will come in our lives that we'll have a plan, we'll have a direction in which we're going in, and then God will throw something in the equation that will serve as a result of a detour. It does not mean that we're no longer on the path of getting to our final destination. It just means that it's going to take a little bit longer to get where you first decided to go. A detour is something that comes along the way, along our route, however we're journeying in life, and it shows up at first glance as a problem. But I want to suggest to you today, child of God, that a detour can be designed by God for you to have gone that route in the first place when you thought that the route that you mapped out was the way, all to understand that that detour was by design. This week, Sister Singletary had, her aunt had passed away some weeks ago, but the actual funeral services for her aunt actually took place this week, and that happened on Friday. Well, there were some things that were happening leading up to this actual funeral service that were not sitting well with Sister Singletary's spirit. She was told through family members and through communication through the family channel that this funeral service for her aunt that was going to take place on Friday out in the Washington D.C. area, she was told that it was going to be primarily a virtual service. Well, here it is Thursday evening. We're sitting together, and Sister Singletary shares with me her angst. She shares with me her concern. And she says, you know what, babe? I don't have any information that suggests that this virtual thing is going to happen. We start looking on the website, and I even looked on the website as well. And we were trying to find a page or a button, a link, or something that would suggest that this virtual experience was going to take place at the time that it was supposed to have the service for her aunt, which was Friday at 11 a.m. Well, after I did my diligence, I responded back to Sister Singletary and said, you know what, babe, I don't know about this either, because I don't see nothing on this website that suggests that there's going to be a virtual experience. And then I proceed to ask questions because, I'm a little techie, just a little bit. I said, did anybody email you? Did you get a text? Did you get anything with a link inside of it for this service? She says, no, I didn't get any email. No, I didn't get any text. No, nobody else said any information other than it was going to be a virtual experience. So then I said, well, who did you get that information from specifically? And we found out that the person that passed on the information is a credible source within the family. Y'all know we got those people within our family. You can't take nothing they say serious. They don't never know what they're talking about. But this wasn't that person. This was a person in the family that does know 99% of the time what they're talking about. They do have accuracy when they declare things. And lo and behold, it was not looking like it was going to happen. So therefore, Friday morning, Sister Singletary wakes up and she says, you know what? I'm going on down there. I'm going to the funeral. Here comes the detour. I did not plan to have to, as a result of her going to Washington, D.C., the kids were not going with her. That means they had to stay home with daddy and I had to play daddy daycare. I was feeling like Brother Kyle for a moment. It just was all thrown on me. And I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't plan. I didn't prepare. I ain't ready to take on the whole household of kids. I ain't ready, but I had to do it. This was a detour being introduced along my route. My plan was to get up and do my work, do my day job, to work on my practice, to do the things that I had in my agenda, my itinerary that I had mapped out the night before. And none of that itinerary said take care of kids for the entire day. None of that itinerary said deal with uncle for the entire day. None of that itinerary said you ain't gonna get much work done. None of that itinerary said that this was going to turn into a family day. But I'll just stay with me for a moment. Just stay with me for a moment because I'm going somewhere. We're talking about I'm on my way, but there is a detour. Well, Sister Calais, she comes down the steps. We're in full swing of this thing now. And Sister Singletary at this point has left. She has went on her journey to Washington, D.C. Daddy has to do the daddy daycare thing. So I'm like, all right, we're in this. We're going to do this. All right. So Calais starts to come downstairs and she's like, where's mommy at? I said, well, mommy had to go out of town for a little bit. She will be back. She'll be back later on today. But daddy got you covered. Don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of it all. She says, well, I'm hungry. And I said, okay, no problem. Now I got you, Calais. I got you. I'm going to go in this kitchen and I'm going to make you something to eat. Well, then to her defense, she hasn't really seen daddy make anything to eat ever. In her 4 years of being on this earth, she has not experienced that or at least paid attention enough to know that, yes, daddy knows how to cook too. So she comes down the steps and then she proceeds to start asking me a whole bunch of questions. Daddy, what you gonna make? How you gonna make it? How you gonna do it this way? Do you know how to use the stove? Do you know how to cook? And to her defense, she ain't never seen daddy do this before. But just please stay with me. Because she never saw me do it before, suggests to her that I didn't know how to do it. It didn't suggest to her that daddy was going to figure it out. But then then the words of my mother had rung in my ear. And my mom, one of her favorite phrases to me, I clearly understood in this moment. I was always an inquisitive kid. And when my mom would tell me to do a certain thing, my favorite question was why? Her favorite response was just this. It was because I said so. I understood that response right then and there. As Calais was continuing to question me, I said, Calais, don't worry about it. Just trust me. Just stay with me. I'm going somewhere. Don't worry about how I'm going to do it. Just trust me. When daddy says he's going to make it happen, he's going to make it happen. Just trust me. You may not know that I know how to put the butter in the pan. You may not understand that I know how to turn the pan on and to get it going. You may not understand that eggs was one of the first things that I learned how to make long, long ago. I got this. Daddy got this. But because you have never seen me do it, that's okay. I'm not going to go through a process of explaining my every step. All I want you to do is just trust me. I don't know who I'm talking to on the line this morning, but I want to suggest to you that that's what God is telling you to do right here in this moment. You may not know how it's going to happen. You may not be able to see clearly through. You may understand this detour and be even frustrated with it to its core. But I want to tell you, child of God, that God says, don't worry about it. Just trust me. Just
Yes.
trust me. Just trust me. We're going somewhere today. We're going somewhere. Just stay with me. Stay with me. So as I was going through this, I'm saying, "Oh wow, that's good, that's good." Calais, you just taught me something about my sermon. That was the little tap that I got in that moment. But I want to suggest to you, child of God, that detours come in our lives at the most, the time that we are most unexpecting these detours to happen, these detours to show up. And the reality of it is, many of us are used to using our GPSs. Many of us are used to locating ourselves and allowing the GPS to tell us turn by turn where we need to go. I want to suggest to you, child of God, that God has a GPS in mind
Yes.
for us. It is not made by Garmin. It's
Hallelujah.
not made by Google, but I
Come on.
want to suggest to you that God's global positioning system is what we really need to be tapping into. Just stay with me
Yes.
for a moment. I just 4 keys I want to get to you and how to properly handle the detours when they come in your life. It's not a question of if the detour is going to happen, it's a matter of when the detour is going to happen. So I want to suggest that you ought to be prepared for the detour. You ought to be prepared for the journey. So there's 4 things I want to leave with you real quick. I want to get this to you. The first thing you ought to do is locate yourself. Yep, that's it. Locate yourself. At the first expression of a detour, you're traveling down I-95. Here comes a detour. You already knew the route because you previewed the route before you went. You're listening to your music, and then all of a sudden you start seeing all of these yellow lights. You start seeing all of these yellow and white signs. Then you start seeing these people walking around in hard hats. And then you realize, uh-oh, this is about to be a change. This is about to be a change of direction. I want to
Yes.
suggest to you the first thing that we ought to do when detour shows up, that thing that came up unexpected, that thing that happened that you didn't plan, that thing that quite frankly just got on your nerves because it messed up what you had planned to do. The first thing we ought to do, child of God, I want to suggest that we need to locate ourselves. Listen to how 1 Corinthians 11 and 28 puts it. He says, everyone ought to examine themselves before they eat of this bread and drink from this cup. We realize that that scripture is commonly used when we approach Holy Communion. But the
Yes.
reality of it is, God says, I don't even want you communing with me if you don't even know where you are. You got to understand where you are, child of God. At the time that a problem arises, instead of responding, we ought to get to ourselves and say, hold up, where am I? Adam, where are you? We ought to say, hold up, where am I? How do I really feel about this situation? In fact, we ought to ask, why did God allow this situation to come about? Why did he allow this situation to come my way? And what we'll realize as we sit to ourselves and not respond, we'll realize that God's got you, that God knows exactly where you are. He has not ever lost a pinpoint on any map. The reality of it is he knows exactly where you are. He knew exactly where you would be before you even knew where you are right now. I'm telling you the magnificence of our God. But we're talking about handling detours, child of God. You ought to examine yourself first. Locate yourself. Yeah, it happened. It got on your nerves, but why? Why are you frustrated? Why are you so in a bunch? Because your plans got messed up. When Sister Singletary needed to go to DC at the last moment, I had to ask myself, what am I going to do today? How am I going to get this done? Why is this happening right now this way? And as I got to myself, and as I calmed my spirit, I realized that it ain't had nothing to do with me. As I calmed myself, as I got myself located, as I came to myself, I realized that the Lord was working some things out. I realized that, yeah, it's a little bit inconvenient to me, but it ain't about me at all. It's about what God's doing in the moment. It's about what God is working out in the moment. I don't know who I'm preaching to, but someone on the line needs to hear this. Don't take it personal because the trials of life come your way. You got to understand and ask this question, child of God, what is God doing in this situation? You got to dry them tears up, child of God. Stand up strong and be strong and courageous. Why has God allowed this thing to come about? Number two, I want to suggest to you that we got to review the route and proceed. One of the things that happens when you approach a detour, you're on your route, you're following your GPS, you may even know the route. I find myself turning on the GPS quite often even when I'm going somewhere such as home, because the GPSs, they're really good now. They tell you about traffic. They tell you, when things are happening, the weather, all of that stuff. So I'm like, wow, this thing really knows what's going on. So there's times where I'll turn the GPS on just to turn it on. I ain't really following it. It's just on to alert me of things. But the reality of it is I know the route. And I want to suggest to you, child of God, that when a detour comes up, you got to understand you don't know the route. And the first thing you need to do is review the new route. The first thing you need to do is review the new calculations. Listen to how Habakkuk 2:2 puts it. He says, then the Lord replied, write the revelation, make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. What does this mean? I have a caption there that says, write your plans in pencil and give God the pen. What does that mean? That means that we have a way, we're supposed to plan, we're supposed to be future projecting, forecasting, and all of that good stuff. But the reality of it is we have our plans and God has his, and there's a merger of the two that comes together. That doesn't mean that we're not supposed to have plans, and that doesn't mean that God's plan won't override our plan. What it does mean is that God's plans should become a part of our plans, and our plans should be God's plans, and God's plans should be our plans, because there's a syncing that should happen as we go along the way. As we travel down the journey called life, we realize, and as we step with Jesus, as we take one step after the other, we realize that Jesus is good. We realize that, oh, taste and see the goodness of the Lord. And so that what happens is my plans start to become just like his plans, because I realize that there's a direction that God has projected me in, and there's plans that I have for myself, but I realize through walking with him over time that his plans are better and supersede my plans. Doesn't mean that my plans can't exist with his plans. It just means that after a while, my plans in my mind becomes his mind. My way of doing things that I used to do change and become his way of doing things, because our plans merge together, but his always supersedes. So we got to review the route. We got to review the route and proceed. What does that mean? That means that the route has now changed. There's some things that you got to pay attention to. And while you were traveling down life before on autopilot, you know the way. I know how to do this thing. Y'all know, nobody on this line, but I'll just talk about myself for a moment. I love learning new things, but one of the dangerous areas about learning new things is I love to reach the point of mastering a new thing, sometimes prematurely before I've actually mastered that new thing. What am I saying? What I'm saying is sometimes it comes, we love learning new things, we love doing new things, but we don't love doing them consistently. When that newness has worn off, when that honeymoon has worn off, when you're not infatuated with them no more, the relationship really matters after the honeymoon phase. It really matters what you do consistently. Everybody can have a great start, but are you going to have a great finish? The finish is resolved in the consistency of the action. So there's a reason why we got to review the route and proceed. You got to know where you're headed. You got to know where you're going. Number three, here it is. I'm going to get on out your way. Trust the recalculated route. Listen to how Matthew 16:21-23 puts it. He says, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hand of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said. Listen to this. Now, this is Peter telling Jesus. Never, Lord, he said. This shall never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You don't have in mind the concerns of God. But watch this. Here's what you're concerned about, only merely human concerns. I want to suggest to you that sometimes God is recalculating things in our lives, and it may look and feel like we just went off the side of a cliff. It may look and feel like we just went off a mountain. It may look and feel that we're about to have a sudden clash. It may look and feel like we're about to have an accident. But I want to suggest to you, child of God, that God knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly the timing. He knows exactly what you're going through. He knows exactly the peril. All he wants us to do is just trust him. That's all he's asking for us to do, regardless of how it looks. He says, just trust you. Just trust me. And fourthly, this is what I want to get to you. This is what I want to leave on a note on. Look at our text. Look at our text. Look at the last sentence of our text. He says, instead, there's nothing wrong with having plans. There's nothing wrong with saying we're going to do something this day or that day. But where we go wrong is we have our own ambitious plans that don't have anything to do with God. We ain't checked in with God. We ain't asked God nothing. We just running with it. But here it is. He said, instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will. Not that I don't have a plan for tomorrow, not that I don't have a plan for today, not that I'm not even going to go out there and make money. But here's the crux of it. As you're doing all of that, it's only going to happen if God allows it. It's only going to happen if it's the Lord's will. In fact, I want to recognize that my good that will happen is only because God got involved in it. And all of my good that doesn't happen, guess what? God wasn't involved in it, so that's why it didn't happen. The reality of it is, this is what we ought to be saying to ourselves and to people as we go on about our everyday life. God is good, and what we're able to do is great. But the reality of it is, we only can do what the Lord allows us to do. So he says, if it's the Lord will, we will live and do this or that. The fourth point is to make sure your power is connected. Sister Singletary, she went to DC, and the funeral has taken place at this point, and she realized that this was a part of her detour. The vehicle, our minivan, was having electrical issues while she was going down there. One of the fuses had went out some time ago. I neglected it. I didn't change it, but it put her in a situation. That's my bad. But God worked it out. That's the good thing about God. Even when we mess up, he works it out. So she's going down there, and none of the charging ports were working in the vehicle. And from where we live to where DC is about a 2.5 hour drive. And most of us, as we're using our GPSs, we use them right on our cell phones. But they're really good as long as you have them connected to a power source. For some reason, when your GPS is on your cell phone and you don't have it connected to a power source, it seems to eat the battery a whole lot. So she went down there, she got down there, but here's the problem. She goes into the funeral with her phone at about 40% battery left. By the time the funeral's over with, and by the time they've gone to the grave site and had the funeral procession and all of that, her phone is now down to about 9%. She still has to get back home. She's never went to DC by herself before. She has no idea about the difference between 95 North and 95 South. So I'm I'm home petrified. Like, wait a minute. I hope she don't get on 95 and continue to go south, because she gonna be on it for a long time, and she'll be getting further and further away. But thanks be unto God, he works things out. But the reality of it is, she realized that she was running out of power, and she was going to have a situation on her hands because she did not know the way home herself. She needed the GPS. God, in his infinite wisdom, sent some people her way that allowed the van to get fixed and allowed her to be able to plug in her phone so that she could have full power. Read this with me, John 15:4-5. He says, remain in me, and also as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Please get this as I get on out of your way. The reality of it is, all good, all fruit that we have comes from God. But here's where we mess up. And this is why we got to make sure our power is constantly connected. Because we don't know when God's going to introduce a detour into our life. And the reality of it is, this isn't for the unsaved right now. This is for the saved folk. The reality of it is, many of us saved folk, no one on this line, but many of us saved folk, we prostitute our relationship with God. What do I mean by that? What we do is, we know how to get a prayer through to God when we need something. And as soon as God answers that prayer or does that thing, we go back to business as usual, doing what we used to do before we were ever put in that situation of needing to pray to God to get him in the situation in the first place. The point that we keep missing is the lesson of why that keeps happening in the first place. God says that if you draw near to me, that there's some things that are going to happen. There's some blessings that are going to come your way. So the reality of it is, for many of us, we experience the goodness of God in pieces and parts. But the reality of it is, God says, I'm trying to bring you to a place of wholeness all the time. You can have, I wish I had time to talk about the different structures of electric and power, but the reality of it is, God is calling us to a place of reflective power. What does that mean? When you look at me, you see God, and when I look at God, I see me. He's trying to bring us to the place of us becoming one with him. Why? Because that is where our power is. I wish I had time to go into the Greek, but the reality of it is, this particular version says remain. Your particular version may say abide, but the reality of it is, what is he telling us to do? He's saying you got to stay connected. You got to stay plugged into God. You can't keep disconnecting. Go run to God for this thing and then disconnect. Run to God for that thing and then disconnect. Run to God for this thing and then disconnect. God says, stop disconnecting from me. Stop disconnecting from your power source. You'll be able to last for a little while on that battery, but that battery is going to eventually run out. You got to get connected to the source and remain connected. Don't be mad at me. This is what Jesus said. He says, if you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. So for any of us that are bearing a little bit of fruit, you might want to ask yourself the question, am I connected constantly? That is the reason, and that is the crux of the situation of this sermon. The reality of it is, we got to stay connected. And when we realize that we are disconnected, don't worry about it. All of us have fallen short. It happens to the best of us. Just get up and get back reconnected, because the righteous person falls down 7 times, but he gets right back up. You got to get up and get connected, because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. You got to get up and get what belongs to you, because it ain't just going to show up at your door. There's some work that God has designed for you to do specifically. There's a mission that God has for you to do specifically. There's a vision that God has for your life specifically. Stop letting the devil take over your joy. Stop letting the devil take over your peace. Stop letting them take over your relationships. You start standing and say, greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. I fell for it then, but I ain't going to fall for it now. Why? Because I'm remaining. Why? Because I'm abiding. I'm connected to that source that I can do all things through Christ that strengthen me. Go get what belongs to you. It belongs to me.